Hello, and welcome to the Reach or Miss Show, the podcast for the customer-focused entrepreneur, where Hayut Yogev speaks with entrepreneurs for entrepreneurs about reaching or missing the critical point of approaching the right customer with the right message at the right time and place. The point where business success starts. And here is your host, Hayut Yogev.
Reach or Miss, Episode 29. Poirier is a multiple-time TEDx, PMX, and MoMonday speaker. He is also the host of the top-rated Conversation with Passion radio show, founder of the speaking program, and he has been featured in multiple television specials. A columnist with Entrepreneur magazine, he has featured in and on CBS, CTV, NBC, ABC, and is one of the few leaders featured twice on the popular Entrepreneur on Fire show. Corey has interviewed over 4,000 of the world's top leaders. Corey Poirier, what a pleasure! I'm so happy you're here, and I'm so happy we met.
Likewise, I'm really excited today to work together and hopefully share some insight that changes one person or hopefully many people's lives.
Yes, I do hope so. I just shared with our listeners what you have done until now. I would like to ask you to share with us what are you doing and most passionate about today, and where are you heading?
So I guess the two things that I'm most passionate about today, the first one is helping people launch speaking careers. So I spend my time, of course, speaking for companies, whether that's keynote speaking, whether it's guest speaking. So after my talks, people have come up to me for years and said, how do I get into this business? How do I get into speaking on the stage? So, the first thing that I've been spending my time recently doing is helping people do just that. So teaching them about the speaking industry from, I'm going to call it A to Z. So, right from day one, you've never spoken before, all the way to you're speaking on a weekly basis and getting paid thousands per talk. So that's one thing I'm really passionate about. And then the second thing is we're getting really close to launching my latest book. And so the book is called The Book of Why and How. And so it's related to the idea of figuring out your why, or your calling, or your passion, or purpose, whatever word you want to put on that. For this book, I'm calling it your why. And then the how, of course, is how do you do that? But not only that, how do you sort of crush it in business, on entrepreneurship? How do you make big things happen? So it's a mix between the why, which is why you would get started in the first place, and the how, which is how do you actually jump ahead and get those shortcuts that otherwise you may have to spend years doing. So those are the two big things right now, getting ready to release the book and running a speaking program where I'm helping other people launch their speaking careers.
Wow, that sounds pretty much to me. Actually, I didn't talk about it yet, but you called yourself the speaker guy, right?
That's absolutely correct.
I would like you to tell us a bit about your journey and company. How did you come to what you do today? How did you find this path of speaking in public or anything that you do today?
So how it all started for me, how I got into speaking, which is the biggest part, I guess it was 2002. So about 15 years ago, I was invited by an actor that I had cast in a stage play. I was invited by him to try my hand at stand-up comedy. There was this local workshop at a university, and essentially we were going to learn how to perform stand-up comedy. So I was terrified. I didn't really like the idea, but I said, you know what? If you're going to face a fear, you may as well face it head on. So I jumped in, and I went through this 2-week workshop to learn how to perform stand-up. All we were taught was how to adjust the mic stand, basically. And then the third week, we went to a comedy club, and we were going to watch people entertain us. And we found out about 5 minutes to show time that we were actually the entertainers for the night. And so we had no material, 5 minutes notice. There were 15 of us that went through that workshop, and I went to the bathroom. I say often I went there to find the exit window, and I didn't find one, but interestingly enough, out of the 15 comics that actually took the workshop, 8 of them had left. They had walked out the front door. As soon as they found out they'd be performing stand-up.
They didn't even look for the back door exit, right? They just left.
They just walked out the front door, and I kind of envied them. I said, why didn't I walk out the front door? That would have been so much easier. But I didn't do that. So I was still there, and basically I performed that night. I bombed, as they call it in comedy. I had a horrible night. I didn't get any laughs, but I kept going back.
Oh.
Yeah, it was a pretty humbling experience. But I went, yeah, and you know what? I didn't know what I was in for. I didn't know what it was going to be like. I did some of my material with sweat coming down my face. Like, it wasn't a great experience, but I stayed, and I kept coming back week after week. And what happened was, about probably, I was very early on, like maybe 6 months in, I finally realized that there was this thing called professional or keynote speaking, and it had all of the things I liked about comedy and had very little of the things I didn't like, and you actually could get paid. Whereas with comedy, if we did get paid, it was like $5 or $10, and we'd spend almost that in gas to get there. So the speaking thing really spoke to me. And so basically, I made the transition. So I kept doing comedy, but I also started doing speaking. And that's sort of how I get into this, because once I started, I basically was hooked. And like I said, I kept doing both of them at the same time. I would go perform stand-up, for 10 or 15 minutes once a week. And then I would go and work with clients in the daytime as a professional speaker. And interestingly enough, if I add one more component, I kept for probably another 4 years, I kept working a full-time sales career as well. So what I would do is I would use my holidays and my vacation days and weekends and evenings to go out speaking for clients. And then during the day, my work day, I would continue to stay in my sales role while also doing stand-up comedy. So it was a pretty busy time.
It's so interesting because most of the public speakers came to be public speakers after they had some field of expertise, some book, something that they really were passionate about, and then they started to talk about that. And you came to speaking just for the sake of speaking.
Yes and no. So yes, absolutely. I came definitely at it in a different way. And like I said, that start with stand-up comedy was totally unique. I haven't run into another speaker yet. I've run into one in 15 years who started with stand-up comedy. The majority of them started as a speaker first, but probably the one thing I did have going for me is that I did have an expertise. I was in business at that point for roughly 10 years in sales, and I did start out doing a lot of sales training and speaking to sales groups. So I did have some expertise, but I certainly definitely started as a speaker in a very unique way.
Let's come back for today, and I want to ask you, who are your customers today?
So my customers today, it varies because, of course, I have more than one business.
Sure.
But the businesses all relate. So I have kind of 3 different customers. So one customer would be my clients that book me as a speaker. And that could be, to give an example, that could be a corporate client. So that could be a company that hires me. It could be an association that brings me in. So, for example, the Association of Plumbers and Welders, just to throw a name. So it could be any type of association where they have membership. And then I have, nonprofits and schools. So that on that side, that customer would be meeting planners or CEOs or HR employees that would bring you in as a speaker. So that's one set of customers for me. A second set of customers, I mentioned the speaking program. Well, those would be people that want to launch speaking careers, or they want to know how to get to the higher fees they're looking for quicker, or they want to get their message out to people. So that's more on the side, almost like coaching. So that's those clients. And then my third tier would be the customers that are, I guess I've worked with these type of customers for about 10 years. And it's, and I love working with these customers, but it's interesting because they're so different than the other 2 groups. But basically, this would be my customers that sponsor our show. They, almost like advertising related customers. So customers that buy sponsorship packages from me or ads. And previous to the radio show and our podcast, I also had a business publication. So similar to, say, Success Magazine, but more of a regional publication. And we sold advertising, so ad spots. So your quarter page print ad and stuff like that. So that would be a totally different customer for me, altogether. So that would be your customers that are, like I say, they're looking to buy advertising, hoping to reach the market or audience that I'm bringing to them. So those are my three sort of tiers of customers.
We are all about customer focus and branding, and especially for entrepreneurs. And you have a lot of experience in approaching customers. And I want to ask you, what is your best advice about approaching your customers? What is the concept or beliefs you have regarding this issue? And what is the best advice you can give our listeners?
I would say one of the biggest areas that I would focus on is personalizing both your approach and the experience to the customer. And so why I say that, I'm working on an article right now, tentatively it's called The Sad Case of Unsocial Media.
Okay.
And so what I'm driving at there is the fact that people approach us. So let's say I'm a potential customer of somebody on LinkedIn, and they reach out and connect with me. And then 5 minutes later, I get an approach from them that says, "Hi, LinkedIn guy." And I'm just saying it's because it's so generic. They don't even say my name, but they'll say, "Hi, guy. It's great to be connected on LinkedIn. I see that we have lots of common traits. We should look at how we can partner together and start a business next week." And that, sadly, is getting pretty normal these days. And what it is people are basically going for numbers. They're not going for quality. So what I'm getting at is whether it's online like that, or whether it's me approaching a client about a sponsorship on our show, whether it's me approaching a client who might be looking to hire me as a speaker, to me, we need to get to a level of personalization. So we need to get to a level where, we can say, even if it's offline and you never connect with them online whatsoever, if you're on the phone or in person, you need to be able to say, well, I was on your website and I noticed that you guys work with, I'm just using this as an example, but I noticed you guys work with Jim's Welding, or, and enter any name you want there, but what a name of one of their partners. It's interesting. We worked with them a couple of years ago as well and had a great experience. And, I'd love to at least see if we can chat and I can introduce myself. You can introduce yourself and just have nothing else, just get to know each other. As an example, I'm just using that as a random example. And I'm obviously not planning that like I normally would, but just paraphrasing, that's personalized, so, "Hey, Bob, I was on your website yesterday, noticed that you guys deal with Jim's Welding, and, we deal with them too, or we dealt with them a couple of years ago, or I know of their company and I know they're doing great things. I'm just curious." And then what you could do is you could ask a question to get them engaged and show you care about them. You could say, "How long have you been working with Jim's Welding?" And so what I'm getting at here, hopefully you can see as well, is I'm personalizing it to them rather than just approaching it cold and basically hoping that I can warm them up without actually showing that I've done any research first. So I would say, first thing I would say when you're approaching somebody, do a bit of research first, do a little bit of prep, and then when you approach them, whether it's an email, a phone call, or in person, customize it or personalize it to them, so that it doesn't feel like you're just looking at them like another number.
I know you have a lot of successes, but I want to ask you about your biggest failure. I want to ask you, what is your biggest, most critical failure with customers? The one that affected your entrepreneurial journey or your own career the most?
Wow. So, that's a great question. And I have to say that, if I look back, it's a sort of a business failure, but I view it as a customer failure as well. And it was really early in my entrepreneurial journey, but I mentioned having a publication. Well, The one I was referring to now was, referring to when I mentioned it, was one I launched in 2007. But back in 1996, I had a previous publication and I ran it for close to a year. I was 18 years old. I launched it and to be honest, had success with it. Like my first issue, we broke even. And then we made money on the following issues, which is very unheard of for an 18-year-old selling advertising who'd never done it. But here's the failure side. I ran it for close to a year. And then the problem, I started out with very little cash flow. In fact, the cash flow we started with was sort of negative because we got a cash flow to start with. I had sort of some seed money, but then we borrowed money from the bank. So we were technically in the negative before we even started. And so where the failure came in is I ran for quite a while, working with customers, but I feel I did a disservice to them because, first of all, I was focusing on all areas of the business. So I was focusing on the accounting, financials, everything else. And by doing that, I wasn't probably servicing customers as much as I should have been. I wasn't going back to them second or third time. I wasn't following up saying, hey, we ran your story or your ad in the latest issue. What did you think of it? What could we have done differently? So I wasn't doing any follow-up or making sure that they were happy with what we did. I was just focused on getting sales because, and this is the mistake I made, I was starting with a negative cash flow, so I was always behind the eight ball. And because of that, I was so focused on trying to keep the business afloat that I wasn't focused on finding new customers and also warming up the customers that we just started working with. And then the end result of that is after about a year, I recognized that the cash flow, it just wasn't going to be sustainable. And at the same time, I didn't want to keep going and take money from customers that I couldn't pay back. So essentially, I decided to close the doors when nobody was owed any money and take it as a learning experience and move on to my next journey. But again, the failure, I would say, is because I was so focused on trying to keep the business afloat, I wasn't focused enough on servicing, supporting customers, following up, and then finding new customers.
Wow, I think you are talking about one point which is very important, that when we are leaving, university, or when someone just want to start with business, all we've been taught and all is really we think that business is about, our profits, our success, bringing more customers. But I think that all these things that we are all, most of the people that work with entrepreneurs today, talk about personalizing your message and service, serve your customers first, and all of that, it's like something that being ignored.
Absolutely.
And now it's time for the success. Tell us the story of your greatest, most significant success as a result of the right customer focus, or something you did right about approaching your customers.
So this goes back to when I was selling photocopiers door to door. And so I say door to door, I mean, it was business to business, but it still, felt like door to door. And so I would go out and sell photocopiers. I worked for Toshiba at the time. So Toshiba being the company that makes the laptops and made TVs. And so I was working with this customer and we were working on this. We had projectors at the time, so data projectors, and they were really costly, like $20,000, I think was the going price, whereas now you can get one for as low as $300. But so they were high end. And I had this customer. We had just released this new version of the projector that was a little cheaper. I mean, it was still, I think, $8,000 or $10,000. But I had this customer who was looking to buy multiple projectors for his technicians so that they could take the projectors out to their sites and show the customer a presentation. And so this client, didn't know him. We just started building a relationship, and he was looking at the projectors, and he really wanted to buy from me. Like he said, I really like you. I liked your personality. It's that whole thing that people buy from people first.
Sure.
Or we could even say people buy with emotion and justify with logic. And the reason they buy emotionally is they're buying from a person. So he wanted to buy from me. He told me, I want to buy from you. He said, but here's my problem. The projectors that you guys sell, they don't feel like they can hold up to the work we do because they seem like they would break easily. And the truth was they were tested. I knew they wouldn't break easily. I knew they would stand up to what he wanted. But what he was telling me is they don't look like it. And so what he was saying is I don't believe in my mind they will. And outside of throwing them on the ground and showing them that they don't break, which wouldn't be wise on my part from a lot, because what happens if it did break? But anyway, because of that, I had to choose. Do I make the sale? Because he's telling me he wants to buy from me. And he actually said, if you tell me that it will withstand what we're doing, I'll buy it from you. But I don't feel comfortable with the machine. So I had to make a choice. Do I make the sale and have the customer even the day he buys it, even before he buys it, already having buyer's remorse and feeling like he made the wrong decision? Or do I be the bigger man and play the big, longer game and build trust with a customer who I knew as a company they could buy more than that projector, meaning I knew that it would come back around to me. And so I said, or do I make the longer choice of saying, you know what, I see where you're coming from, Greg. I know you're not going to be happy with these projectors because you're already not happy with them. And even though I'd love to make this sale, I'd rather build your trust. And hopefully, and I didn't say there's no guarantees, I said, hopefully I will get a chance to work together again. And
Wow.
and he said, you know what, and that was a hard thing to do because I was on a salary plus commission, but a small salary. So first of all, I was taking food off my own table to say that. Secondly, we had this thing called President's Club, which was a club that only like 2% typically of the salespeople made. And those numbers would have pushed me a lot closer to President's Club. But anyway, I knew what was right by the customer, and that's what I did. I went that route. And even my sales manager was arguing with me about it. He said, no, just make the sale. Who cares what happens? And, you know, and I said, at the end of the day, I got to be able to sleep at night. And I said, you know, I'm in your top percentage of sales reps. So if you need to fire me, go ahead, because I know I'll find something else, but I'm not going to sell something to a customer that they don't want to buy. And so what happened was I made the decision. I told him, you know what, I believe there will be another day for us to work together. And lo and behold, I think it was less than 2 months later. It might have been even less than that, but it wasn't much more than 2 months later. He called me and said, hey, Corey, it's Greg. Remember I bought the projectors off you? I said, yeah. And he said, they're working okay. You know, nothing special or anything. They're working okay. But I have something else for you now. We're looking to buy the office equipment, so the photocopiers for all of our offices in the entire region. And I want to see if you put a proposal together for me. So long story short, to jump ahead quite a bit, we put a proposal together. We competed heavily with other competitors. Like, he didn't just give me the deal, but the end result is I won the deal. And that was probably my first or second, it's a toss-up, but first or second largest deal I did working for that company was from that customer.
Such a beautiful story. That's great. And it's also great that you're talking about your previous successes. It's nice. And I want to ask you, can you recommend the best, most effective technological or digital tool that you use or that you think that entrepreneurs should use? So what is your recommendation?
So I'll go from two angles. One is related to, because I talked about cash flow, and I find that so many people are jumping into entrepreneurship now early on. So people now, well, you know, I talked about the challenge and perhaps why I did the speaking on the side, as I mentioned, for 4 years before I went full time, was because I had that experience of going full time with little cash flow earlier on. So first of all, cash flow is a huge thing. And I still think it's an area where a lot of entrepreneurs, they get into a situation where they have to make a decision to go in business, and they make a quick decision and they're not ready financially. So what I would say is a big one is you need to get paid. And I would say something like, I mean, you can insert whichever one of these you would like here, like Stripe is one example, but PayPal is another one. So PayPal is the one I give a lot of credit to because before Stripe came along, I was using PayPal. Now I use Stripe as well, but I was using PayPal for working with clients who were willing to pay, and I would offer them a small, tiny discount for paying either in advance or paying right whenever I delivered a service or a product by paying by PayPal. And what that did was that brought cash flow into my company quicker than if I was waiting for the check is in the mail type situation.
Yeah.
And then I would go and add now in Canada, now there's a thing, email money transfer, which basically allows people to transfer money from one bank account to another. So with a simple email, somebody can send you money. So that would be kind of the next step, sort of the PayPal, because that one, there's no service fees to receive the money. And at the same time, it's instant. Whereas with PayPal, the money goes into your PayPal account and then you transfer it to your bank account. So it's still maybe 3 or 4 days before you see it. So that all said, I would say, first of all, PayPal or something similar where you can receive your money, your revenue quicker, I think is a huge technology that I didn't have that first time around. And it could have been, believe it or not, it could have been the thing that would have saved that newspaper I had early on if PayPal was around at the time. So that's one technology. But then if I talk about technology that can help you grow as an entrepreneur, I would say what we're talking through right now, podcasting. So I would say whether you use Stitcher, whether you use iTunes, or, pick any other one, Google Play, iHeartRadio, whatever you use to listen to it, I think making the time to feed your mind with the right content. So figuring out which podcasts are right for you, feed your mind with that content. And I think using that technology, so the technology overall is podcasting or online radio shows, with whatever platform you use to listen to it, and there's lots of those, but using podcasting to feed your mind, which is something we didn't have before, because it allows you to learn on the go. You can learn when you're walking the dog, you can learn when you're driving to work, you can learn when you're at the gym, whatever way you choose. So I would say, first of all, getting money quicker, which would be a PayPal or similar. And then second, I would say feeding your mind with whatever platform of podcasting you use. And the two most popular, I would say, would be Stitcher or iTunes.
Wow, Corey, I must say that you are so original, really. You really focus on the customers or the listeners that we are talking about, but you're not going to the obvious technological tools. And it's great to listen to that. There are so many things that help your success, but I want to ask you today, what is the one factor that affected the most on your success? What is the one key success factor for you?
Again, as you'll probably see, I always like to give two because one is a short answer. But the easy answer would be the fact that I spent the time to uncover my passion, or again, my why, if you want to call it that. I think that's where it all starts. If you're an entrepreneur and you haven't figured out your why yet, I think you're going to run into a lot of challenges. It's going to be hard to deal with the tough days if you don't know why you're doing it in the first place, or if your why isn't big enough or your desire isn't big enough. So I would say the fact that I have a really big why, that I'm really passionate about what I do, I would say would be a really big factor. And then something I learned along the way is, as a person that grew up in a small little town, I was kind of taught to say yes to everything and then figure out how to do it later. But what I've learned that the high achievers do really well is they actually say no to most things so they can say yes to the right things, yes to the things that'll move the needle. So taking on the ability to learn how to say no and do it with a little bit of class and etiquette, that has probably been the secondary factor to any success I may have had.
Thank you for that. And before we say goodbye, I just want to ask you, what is the best way to connect with you for all our listeners that would like to be in contact? And I'll just say before that, of course, every link of your site or anything you mentioned today will be on the show notes. But what is the best way to contact you?
So I always like to leave people with some extra value rather than just, hey, here's my website. So what I would say, and this is kind of depends when the person's listening, but there's a win for the listener either way. So if they're listening before, let's say November 1st, so on November 1st, and because, as we know, shows can be archived forever, so I'll say November 1st, 2017, if it's before that, you can actually grab a free copy of my latest book, which is simply called Why. You can grab a free copy at thebookofwhy.com. So again, thebookofwhy.com, using the lowercase word simply why. So not simply why, but using the lowercase word why.
I'm going to use this advantage right away. Thank you.
No, my pleasure. But I will add one thing for those listeners that listen after November 1st, 2017. On that same website, we're changing it over after November 1st to launch our newest book, which is The Book of Why and How. It might sound similar to the one that's free right now, but basically the one that's free is one section, and it's a full book, but it's one section of the newer book. So the newer book will have 3 sections. And so basically after November 1st, the new book will be being launched through a Kickstarter campaign. So if you go to the website after November 1st, you have the chance to buy the full completed book, meaning like a 200 plus page book that's filled with 3 sections and a whole bunch of thought leader quotes. If you go there now, you'll get a free book, which is, I think, off the top of my head, I think is a little over 100 pages, which has the core of just how do you find your why and why you should bother, and then has some thought leader quotes. So there's something for either person, whether you go beforehand, the book is free, you go after, even if you're paying for the book, it's a bigger book. So either way, that's where I would send people. And then if I said a second place, because sometimes people want to connect on social media, then I would say if you want to go to sort of the hub, I would go to thatspeakerguy.com, and my social media links are there, so you can click and follow me there or connect with me there as well.
That's great. And Corey, I would like to thank you so much. I enjoyed this conversation so much. And you gave us so many tips and things to think about.
Oh, thank you so much. And to the listeners, I would say thank you as well. And I truly believe, without listeners, whether it's on my own show or whether it's on your show, I believe without listeners, we don't have a purpose. So thank you to the listeners for giving me and us a purpose.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
See you later. Thanks again.
Bye. And for you, our listeners, until the next time, it all goes down to this. You either reach or miss. Keep reaching your goals and vision. Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Reach or Miss Show, the podcast for the customer-focused entrepreneur. You can find all the information, links, and resources that was mentioned at the show in our website, reachormiss.com. See you next week.